Welcome to the Resilient Man podcast. I'm Ari Graff. And on this podcast, we're going to ask tough questions about divorce and relationships and hear stories of how men grew from divorce and give you answers and practical advice. All right. So today I've got a friend and colleague, it's Doctor, right? Christian Villacres.
It is Dr. Christian, yes.
So Christian and I met on a men's retreat that he was leading. So I'm really interested in hearing a little bit more about your background before we get into some of the relationship topics. Because I know you have a Chinese medicine degree, but I want to kind of understand all the things you're doing, the martial arts, coaching, men's work. How does it all fit together?
It's a really big web that sometimes feels like it all makes sense, and sometimes it all feels very disconnected. So my official degree is a doctor of acupuncture and oriental medicine. I've been practicing Chinese medicine, acupuncture, nutrition for a little over 10 years. I've worked in different hospital settings. I've worked in different group practices. And a few years ago, kind of as part of my own healing journey and my own sort of coming into myself, I branched out on my own and I opened up my own business. So now I own a storefront, which is, I guess its own path and sort of overcoming a lot of fear, becoming more resilient, and allowing myself to just kind of really be myself and sort of have confidence in that.
He's underselling it. It's a really cool space. It's called Buddha Hand.
It is called Buddha Hand, so right now my practice is called Buddha Hand Wellness, but it's funny you should even mention that because a big part of what I'm going through right now in this process of allowing myself to change is going through business changes, and that means changing my business name. That hasn't happened yet. I'm still in the process of doing that, but I'm going to be relaunching my business brand in a couple months here. And I sort of see that as getting out of my own way, and allowing things to sort of develop on their own identity. Buddha Hand relates back to, I guess, my story. You mentioned the martial arts, the coaching. It really goes back to sort of this little seed that's been inside of me ever since I was a little kid. I've always, for better or for worse, I've always been really drawn to spirituality, to non-conventional spirituality, especially being raised in, a Latino home that had a lot of, Christian influence. I was always
You're
drawn away from the
Ecuadorian. Is your
that's
background?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's correct. Yeah. So my family's from Ecuador. I was born in the United States. So first generation branching out into the new world. Really, and this might be a topic for another day, but really letting go of the influence of like colonization, internally and externally, and really sort of figuring out what it means to be the next generation, especially now that I'm a father. Um, but I've always been drawn to spirituality. And, I joke that in a past lifetime, I was probably, a Taoist monk. And then a previous lifetime before that, probably some sort of yogic priest, because I've always loved India and I've always loved China.
Yeah.
And those things have always pulled me. So ever since I was a little kid, I was into it. I didn't know what it was, but I would just practice yoga and like breathing stuff when I was a little kid, not really knowing what I was doing. It was just a private thing that I did in my room that no one else knew about. And then all of a sudden, I hit my 20s and I say, oh, people do
Wait, so
this.
this is improvisational yoga? This was like you making up yoga based on
Yeah,
some idea you had?
absolutely.
Okay.
I remember, I mean, I think, you look at little kids, you look at babies and, they don't have any constructs in their head that are stopping them from exploring the world around them or exploring their own bodies. I watch my little boy and no one ever taught him how to dance. He just does it.
Yes.
No one's teaching him how to do anything. He's just learning it through his body and experientially. And so when I was a little kid, I would naturally do breath work and try to hold my breath for as long as I could. I would naturally do like different stretching postures and, contort my body in different positions just to see what it was. In all honesty, I was kind of ashamed of it when I was a little kid, so I never let anyone see it. It was just, when I was, 5 years old, I would just close my door and I would, you know, lay on my back and touch my toes behind my head, and see if I could stand on my shoulders, and do all these different things. And so I really do believe that, once we sort of deconstruct ourselves, all of this really like natural knowledge is inside of us, just kind of waiting to be unearthed.
Yes.
That's really been my journey really over, I'd say, the last 6 7 years has been like really deconditioning myself. And this is language that I only have now. I didn't have this 7 years ago, back then it just felt like my life was falling apart and I was having to find new ways of being. But so I guess getting back to the question, it started in my youth. Being
Started early. So like it's really just so interesting the thread that goes from like you being a toddler to now. Not everybody can, I think, identify that thread.
I don't think I'm necessarily special, but I do think I'm lucky. And again, I really just have this feeling that we are exactly who we're meant to be. And we've always been exactly who we're meant to be. And things started happening very early on in life, that make us compartmentalize ourselves and, not feel comfortable expressing whatever truth we carry inside of us. And that is, I think a big reason, if not maybe the whole reason, why people get sick in the world and why our society is sick and why individual members of the society are sick. You know, on the surface level, my practice clinically is very simple. I, take basic diagnostics. I get an idea about what's going on in people's lives, and then I construct acupuncture protocols to help, get rid of pain, balance out hormones, different energetic issues that they might be having. Um, but something that I just feel is that it really has nothing to do with what can be done to you from the outside. People are making choices. People are making choices every day that are impacting their mental and their physical health. And those choices are usually being made from a myopic perspective that they've been funneled into and that they don't know how to get out of. And outside of putting needles in people's bodies and helping them, make dietary choices, I really want to help people realize that maybe they aren't who they think they are. Maybe there's something totally different. Maybe they've been, repressing or suppressing. Maybe they've been holding back. Maybe they've been trying to fit in for, well, I mean, we'll say for all the wrong reasons. I think we're always trying to fit in for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Trying to be accepted, trying to be loved, and not believing their own lovability, their own worth. And then you reach a certain point where the stress gets too much. The any conglomeration of negative emotions, and then you start making unhealthy choices on what you eat, what kind of relationships you're in, drinking too much, smoking too much, whatever sort of addictive sort of tendencies might arise. And I really think that all of that can all be dissolved away, if we figure out um, how to see it, and then how to like start wiping it off of us. Starting with social norms, family customs, all these different things that we put value in that maybe it's in their own way they have value, but they're also traps.
So did you become a coach? Like I don't even know if you identify as a coach, but the way that you're talking right now, it's that there's this psychological piece that it sounds like Chinese medicine doesn't quite get to. Is that accurate?
Um, I think Chinese medicine does get to it, but not necessarily in the way that it's taught, because Chinese medicine it's a holistic medicine. I mean, it looks at all the components of an individual's body and mind and spiritual relationship to everything. It comes from Taoism, and Taoism is very simply about, getting back to the nature of things and not being stuck in the socialization of things. I think what gets tricky is when any holistic medicine gets taught in the West, it's automatically patterned into like a reductive type of system. So instead of, you get taught to look at, oh, this point does this herb does that. And while those things
Mhm.
may be true in the small picture of things, they really lose the essence of, again, just the essence of the greater picture. I don't identify as a coach, but I do coaching work. Just like I say this laughingly, like I don't identify as a shaman, but I do shamanic work.
Yeah.
I really try not to identify as anything, honestly. I guess if I were to identify as anything, it's what I wrote in my most recent Substacks. I'm a kung fu fighting, time traveling tantric yogi. That's what I am. So
That's the closest professional identity that you can come
yeah.
to.
I had to get a degree so that I could do what I do without looking, like without basically sounding like a crazy person. But I think I still end up sounding like a crazy person sometimes, which I think is also what the world needs, is just someone to, kind of slap the silly out of them and then get them back to a deeper reality.
It's like we need a degree in order to let our freak flag fly. Is that
I think so. I mean, you need a degree to be taken seriously. And just like you need Google reviews for people to trust you, and all this other stuff. We live in a world of reputation, and in order for people to pay for your time and for you to be able to value your time so that you can live your life, yeah, I mean, I think it's important to have a degree, even just having a storefront, like people have a greater sense of confidence in who I am. And I also have a greater sense of confidence in who I am because it took a lot of work to get here.
so? I want to know about your divorce story a little bit, uh, and also the other formative romantic relationships you've had, because I want to understand how your story about yourself changed over time. That's kind
Sure.
of fundamental to what I'm doing in my coaching, with men who are getting divorced, is that they develop usually a really negative story about themselves and how they've, failed in their marriage or failed in life. And that the journey is to create a new positive story about what's happened so you can move forward. Otherwise, you're just trapped. Um, so
Right. So I actually, my marriage, I don't feel like I failed in my marriage. I feel like I succeeded in my marriage by ending it. It would have been a failure on so many different levels, personally and relationally, to have stayed in that relationship.
how old were you when you got married?
So my marriage, I was 22. And it's its own, sort of unique. I mean, I guess all relationships are unique, but basically, I went to Northwestern University for my undergrad. And I don't think I had a single girlfriend really the whole time. I mean, I had, you know, flings that would last maybe a few months. Um, Most of them, probably had a lot more to do with, getting drunk and having sex, and then, the volatility and like sort of the excitement that kind of came from that. But they weren't necessarily deep, meaningful relationships. It wasn't until I basically went through a massive depression, in, I guess, a little bit more than halfway through college, that I took a year off of school, and I went to do a year abroad at an art school in Italy, in Florence. I was lucky enough that I was able to do that, and that was kind of one of those pinnacle experiences that really changed my life. It allowed me to connect to my artist side of myself, a side of myself that was not being nurtured at all while I was in college. I was in a fraternity that I certainly didn't fit in with. I
Oh,
was in
really?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just debaucherousness, and I don't necessarily regret it. I mean, maybe parts of it I do, because I do think it caused some delays in my life, that they are what they are. Um, but something inside of me, at the time was like, this isn't good for you. Like this is just going to lead to, and that something made me really depressed. And then that something also like caused me to say something, to speak up. And, I was able then, like I said, to be able to get out of school for a year and just, kind of go explore myself. Not everyone's lucky enough to have that opportunity, but I'm really grateful that I did. And so when I spent a year in Italy, I completely disconnected myself from, the Midwestern college lifestyle. And I got physically much healthier. I lost a bunch of weight, stopped drinking so much. Definitely was eating healthier food over there than over in the Midwest. And I spent the whole time just really engaging my creative side. I would take photos and I learned how to draw and I was writing all the time and journaling and just traveling by myself, taking the train from one city to the other, not worrying about what anyone thought, not worrying about even having relationships or girlfriends or anything like that, or feeling like I wasn't good enough because I wasn't confident enough to, approach a woman, anything like that. I just let myself really focus on myself. And then when I came back, to finish up my time at Northwestern, I ended up having to do an extra year because I changed my degree pattern, and I ended up getting my bachelor's of fine arts, and I also ended up getting like a co degree in film production. And so I really sort of leaned in, and this was coming from I was studying like chemistry and biology before, all of which still serves me now, but it just wasn't working for me in that environment. I was never meant to be a Western doctor, and so
Yeah.
then, I came back and really leaned into my artistic side and had a lot of fun doing it. Still partied a lot, because it is what it is, um, at least back then. And along the way, I made a connection with this girl who was a year older than me, and she was going to be graduating while I was still in my fifth super senior year. But I had a crush on this girl my freshman year of college, and she was just like she was on a different level than me at that time, But then when we sort of bumped into each other when I'd come back, she took an interest in me. She was like she noticed something different about me. Um, and something just really beautiful blossomed between us. She was an actress, an artist. She came from Switzerland, so she was not a US citizen, which leans into why we got married. Um, but we felt like madly in love, just like two deeply passionate artists. Um, like just everything we did was art together. Everything we did was like an expression, like a project that we were working on together. It was it was really beautiful, but it was also really started to highlight both of our very specific types of attachment patterns that we have, our insecurities, our codependencies. Um, but at the time, it just felt like passion and it felt like youthful artistry just expressing itself. I remember actually feeling and like, writing her a letter, how I felt like both of our bodies had been sewn together and we were becoming two wings of this like unified creature, and it was like very, very dramatic.
It sounds
Uh,
like what is that term? It's like your twin
Twin
uh
flame.
twin flame.
Yeah. She might have been. I mean, I don't know that I believe in the twin flame thing. I think we got maybe a lot of fires burning around us. Um, but anyway, we had this really powerful relationship. I was still living in Evanston. She moved into the city, Lakeview, which is where everyone moves to first. And then, you know, I moved in with her during my senior year of college, which made me feel super cool that I was like living in the city and then had to like go into like Evanston for, for classes, because I was a city guy now and that never happened before. Um, so we spent, that last year of my college time together, living together, and her visa was in its like final stages of basically running out. Um, and we just couldn't fathom being apart from each other. Um, Part of me inside knew that like we weren't going to be together forever. Um, she said that she didn't feel that way. I don't know that I believe that necessarily. Um, I think all of us have an inkling of like different ways, different routes that can be taken. But at the time, the idea of being separated was just so absolutely painful that neither one of us could go through it. And so I remember one day as I was heading out to school, we were in the stairwell of our of our apartment building, and I just dropped down on my knee. No, no
In the
ring, no
stairwell.
nothing. And I was like, marry me. She was like, okay. And so I guess long story short, we did, we had our parents thought it was a terrible idea.
I
My
was
parents,
wondering about that. Yeah.
yeah, no, my parents were terribly, terribly worried about me and my life choices. They always kind of have been, less so now, but maybe. Um, but no, they thought it was a terrible idea. And they were also really worried that they would lose me. They were worried that if I married this girl, that somehow I'd probably end up moving to Switzerland with her and living over there and etc. Though I was literally telling them, we're getting married so she can stay here. Like, not going anywhere. But they were worried. My parents were very overprotective. And as I think, Latino immigrant families tend to be, they tend to really like stay inside and protect themselves, and have a difficulty taking risks outside of a certain space because there was just so much effort and volatility, that took place to get here in the first place. Um, Her parents also thought it was a bad idea, but they weren't necessarily as concerned about it. I think they had like a deeper state of confidence just about life in general. Um, so we got married. We went to the courthouse. We went out to lunch afterwards, and then we went out on the like little Odyssey boat tour, this thing that they do on Lake Michigan when you go down to Navy Pier. And it was sweet, but in the back of my mind also, like even the day of, I was like, this isn't going to be forever, but this is important right now. And we went on that way, living together, being artists. At the time I was really working as an artist. I was doing art shows, I was painting, I was sculpting, I was making money as a photographer, videographer, um, you know, all of which was really meaningful and beautiful, but also like professionally. And I wonder what different choices I would have made had I had the wisdom I have now. Um, But then I would say about 2 years into that marriage, um, I was just miserable. Like, and not that there was anything wrong with her. I just needed more. Like I needed to have more relationships. I needed to have more experience and more exposure. I needed to have more sex with, frankly, like, I mean, at least that's what I felt back then. And I guess to a certain extent, I still think it's true. Um,
Why was that?
I wanted to have more
Why was that
experiences.
important? Yeah.
That was important. It was important, I guess, because I was having uh, sorry, someone's waving in my window here, the beauties of a storefront. Someone thinks you're supposed to deliver the Uber Eats to me, but this happens probably once a month. I was like, I didn't order it. It must have been next door. Um, well, I think sex is a way of discovering yourself. Sex is a way of it's a way of embodying different aspects of your psyche. You know, just like martial arts, there's all these archetypes within us. There's all these different models of archetypes within us. The first one that I really learned about was the Jungian archetypes of king, warrior, magician, lover. And because I was not experienced enough and developing resentment around my lack of experience, I think even just on a physical level, um, I was embodying like the negative aspect of all of those. I was I was not happy, fulfilled, or giving as a lover. I felt physically weak and afraid in my warrior aspect. I wasn't succeeding in the kind of growth that I would see, the kind of quiet, like strong growth that a strong king really embodies. And my magicianness was going towards the darkness, which meant that I was lying. I was thinking about cheating, and then I did start cheating. And all of these things made me feel like really terrible inside. And I knew then that I had to end this relationship if I was just going to become the kind of person that I wanted to become and, go have the experiences that I needed to have in order to make that happen. Um, so I remember distinctly
Did you
after
feel
like
bad at the time when you came to that recognition?
I felt bad for her. I felt scared of confronting her because I had a history, I think just like any young boy, but really strong, like dominating, upsetting the primary theme in my life and what kind of energy that I think I was really more afraid than anything. It took probably several months of being quiet, getting distant, like uh
Well,
internally sort of working up the courage to be able to say what I needed to say, to rip off that band-aid. And it got to the point I packed my bags, I packed everything that I needed, and then I went out into like the dining room and I said, I have something I need to tell you. And naturally she was very upset, very angry, blamed me for a whole bunch of different things, said that I was wrong, that I didn't know what I was feeling, that I was ruining something beautiful, and all of these things were probably true in their own way. And then I grabbed my stuff that I'd packed, and I went to my friend's house and I slept on her couch. And then I was there for the night, and then the next morning I ran away, basically. I drove to the East Coast where I'm from, where my parents live. They weren't even there. They were on vacation somewhere, and I had a key to the house. And so, I got to DC, ordered myself a whole bunch of Chinese food, ate my face off, watched TV, and stayed there for basically a couple days, just trying to avoid all the angry, like text messages that I was getting. And at that point, in that throughout the process of that breakup, I understood that, and this probably gets into the, Mr. Nice Guy kind of stuff. I understood that in this, someone has to be the villain. Like
mhm.
someone has to be the bad guy in order to make this thing go through, and that had to be me. And so I knew even then, that like nothing I can say is going to make her feel better. Nothing I can say should make her feel better because she has to be as pissed off as she needs to be able to realize that this was necessary and I'm not the person that she thought I was. And
That's not being a nice guy. That's actually being a good ender.
yeah, and that's why I said I don't think I failed in my marriage. I think I succeeded by ending it. Like I was a nice guy for a while, and it was my fear of not being the nice guy that made it take so long to make it end. But being able to not try to make her feel better, it made me feel bad. It made me feel like I knew I wasn't an asshole, but it certainly I knew that she had to think I was an asshole in order for it to go forward. Um, and I guess long story short, like all breakups, it took months in some way for the communication to really end, for her to feel like she had closure, all these things that I don't think really exist, but that people think they need. Um,
Yes.
and I was very happy. I started seeing people right away. Like, I started experiencing different kinds of growth. And that is when I found martial arts, like in my early 20s. I mean, I'd done it when I was younger, but it really meant something to me when I started when I was like 24. Um, that's where I started to just like really expand my, I guess what I call like my embodiment, my mind body awareness, this cultivation of an aspect of myself that was so desperately needed but really underdeveloped. Um, it's also when I joke with new students when the first like 6 months to a year of my martial arts training is when I felt the most vulnerable because all my illusions about anything I knew or anything I could do went totally away. I was like, oh, I don't know anything about anything. Like I'm really starting from scratch here. Um,
It's hard being a baby, being a beginner. Me getting back into Taekwondo like a year and a half ago after quitting as a teenager, and just, I mean, I'm a 47-year-old man now, so like, I'm in good shape, but like, I don't have the flexibility that these kids have.
sure.
Um, and learning some of these moves, just sort of building those motor movements, it's not the same. Um, so I'm just I have recent experience of being that beginner in martial arts.
I mean, the neuroplastic benefit of it is just, unbelievable. I believe I feel that every time you learn a new movement pattern, you unlock something within yourself. It's almost like they're magic. The more you do them and the more you do them from a place of naturalness as opposed to performative, it really it makes you smarter. Like something that in my own ramblings and writings, I say you think the way that you move. And if you move in very rigid and linear ways, and that are limited, linear, rigid ways, then that's the way you think. If you learn how to move in graceful, circular patterns, then your mind starts to let go and be able to deal with all things and with greater grace and fluidity. And I think, ultimately that's where these things come from. It's, yes, there's a fighting component for sure, but you know, there's also the knowing how not to fight, how to use your body and your mind to de-escalate versus to just escalate, to end things without them even having to begin, and that is real internal skill, it's like I joke that like the greatest technique is the one that never has to be shown, you know, it's the one that never needs to be applied. It's just being applied all the time. It's an ease. Um,
I love this idea of embodiment work and using the body to access different parts of ourselves or turn certain things on in ourselves. So that's become part of the coaching that I use.
the body's a tool, it's totally underutilized, totally or underexplored and under understood. I would say the majority of my work is embodiment work. It's, you know, we're very good in our society at telling people what doesn't feel good in our bodies. This hurts, that hurts. We're very unpracticed in telling people what feels good. We're not connected to the parts of us that feel good. No one even ever asks you what feels good in your body today. It's a nice thing to be able to tune into. Um, Being in a body, we relate to so much, to the aging, to the pain, to the decay, but like every single moment is absolute pleasure, if you know how to feel into it, and that's the point of yoga. That's the point of, different kung fu practices. I say kung fu instead of martial arts because it's different. That's the purpose of pranayama and tantra. All of this stuff is to untap or to tap into this like ever present state of pleasure that is just existing. And that's why we have bodies.
Well said.
Thank you. Um, I know we're talking about relationships, I ended up staying in this marriage for like 5, 6 years after we broke up because of her green card situation. Um, and
Regret?
what's that now?
Do you regret that?
No, not at all. I'm happy that I was able to help her. I'm happy, I throughout the 5, 6 years that or five, yeah, maybe 5, 6 years that followed that, I went through a whole slew of relationships, through a whole bunch of different, physical experiences, interpersonal experiences. And I guess I feel like a liar now, but I never told anyone that I was married because I just didn't really think about it. Like it was out of sight, out of mind. She was living her own life, doing her own thing, and we didn't speak at all for, like I said, maybe 4 or 5 years. And so, I went through all these different relationships that some of them were very meaningful. They all provided me with different growth and opportunity. And but yeah, none of them knew I was married. I don't think I really felt like I was lying to them. I really just didn't think about it. Um, if they were to hear this now, they might disagree. But it's funny because, when she reached out to me at some point and she was like, "Hey, I got my green card. I'm good to go. We can get divorced." And at that point, I had been in a relationship now with a girl that I really liked. And we were probably about maybe like a year into our relationship. And so then I told her, I was like, "Hey, so I gotta go to court next week, because I gotta go sign some papers and get a divorce." And she was like, "What?" She was pissed. She was very pissed. Um, she accepted it, naturally. We talked about it and whatnot. And then after my divorce, her and I went out and we had a celebratory drink together. But I ended up being in a relationship with this girl for like 4 or 5 years in totality. And that relationship, more than my marriage, highlighted a lot of my weakness, my attachment, and my codependency. Um, like my marriage was, for the most part, was pretty easy. It's the two relationships that followed my marriage that were really, really challenging. Um,
So how would you describe the pattern that you kept repeating?
oh, I just wanted so desperately to be loved. I wanted so desperately to not be left. I didn't want this woman in particular to think badly of me. And none of it made any sense, like really, it was all like irrational emotional stuff. And a lot of it, and this is not to put everything on moms, but like in my house growing up, my mom told us all the time, no one's ever going to love you as much as your family. And I understand why she said that. I understand where that was coming from, patterns of immigration, dealing with, alcoholic father, abusive home situations, um, and this like desperateness in some ways on her end to just make us feel so loved and to prove to herself and to us how much she loved us. But I think my sister and I really came out of that thinking, oh shit, no one is ever gonna love us, and we are going to be alone for the rest of our lives. So if you're with someone, do whatever you gotta do to not make that shit end. Um, and now that I'd already kind of had more experiences and all that, like I really had a hard time not seeing the toxicity in that. And the girl that I was with, I mean, she had her own issues, She came from an abusive home. And then I found that I had a pattern after a couple other relationships of ending up with girls that came from abusive homes with a lot of physical abuse and alcoholism and just volatile emotions. And so there was something about me that kept hooking on to these girls and something about these girls that kept hooking on to me. Um, and I got to the point where, I was living in an abusive home with my now ex. She would get aggressively drunk. She would hit me,
Hmm.
and I knew how to fight at that point, and I knew I can't even block if she tries to hit me because, she's anemic, she's gonna bruise, and I'm just gonna look like I'm fucking hitting this person. But there were way too many nights where I had to stop this person from, you know, like hitting her head against the wall because she was just so angry at me and drunk, and angry at me because she knew that like I didn't want to marry her. Something inside of me like said like I don't want to get married yet. She's like I want to get married to you, and I was like I don't. That doesn't feel right yet, and that's honestly where her alcoholism started to really come into place. Um,
So
and
that was a very heavy
that was
relationship.
that was a hard time. This was when I was in the early stages of my master's program. Um, she ended up moving. She ended up, leaving Chicago and going to the West Coast. And we stayed in a long distance relationship for about maybe 3 months, 4 months. And at the time, I didn't have a lot of money, and I spent a crap load of money flying out to see her, trying to be supportive. But then on the other side, I was over here living my life, and lo and behold, some other girl caught my eye, or I caught her eye, one way or the other. And next thing you know, I'm cheating on my long distance girlfriend with this new person. And we're like, oh, there's a pattern here. It's like I lie, I cheat, and I keep secrets because I'm uncomfortable with saying these things out loud and just doing what I need to do. There was a lot of weakness in there. Um, and eventually, just, I remember getting out of one of my final exams at, in the middle of winter. And, a whole bunch of people were, going from school to like the bar down the street downtown to, get drinks and stuff. And I had a couple drinks, pulled out my phone, went to the bathroom, got into the stall, called her and said, "This is over. Like you can't do this anymore. This is ending now." Um, and then I basically hung up the phone, and I knew that at that moment, like things kind of had to unfold on their own. But I got off the phone. I ignored the phone calls. I ignored the text messages. I let her go through whatever process she had to go through, which I'm sure was ugly, but necessary. And I went back out and I kept drinking with people who had no idea what I'd just done. Um, and then the girl that I had ended up cheating on my ex with, I ended up being in a relationship with her for like 6 years. Uh, and then, that relationship, so much of these, I mean, I guess all relationships, like there's like, sex does such awesome things, but sex also does such distorting things, and our relationship was really tied up in, like a certain kind of sexual energy that was really hard to walk away from, but that was obviously unhealthy. Um,
What was that sexual energy?
oh, I don't know. I mean, I know. I mean, maybe I feel bashful saying it, but it's just like it was aggressive. It was aggressive. It was dominant and submissive, and it always is. I mean, that's not the bad part of it. Um, we would fuck. We would never kiss. We never kissed. And both of us wanted to kiss, but we couldn't kiss. There was something like we just had to, pardon my language.
Something primal. Yeah.
I wouldn't even say it was primal. I'd say it just tapped into it. Just like who I was for her, I believe tapped into a lot of the trauma that she had when she was a kid. And what she was for me tapped into me, filling in the gaps of a lot of the insecurities that I had. Like the way that we had sex made me feel stronger, made me feel powerful, but it wasn't wholesome. And I think you can do nasty shit while being incredibly wholesome. It's like, so it's not a matter of like being a prude. Like I'm far from being a prude. Um, but you could tell that our sexuality was an expression of our repressions. Um, it just wasn't healthy, like the names we'd call each other, the labels we'd give each other, like it wasn't sustainable. I'm surprised it lasted as long as it did. And you know, to that point, she ended up cheating on me with her high school sweetheart who was in a totally different state because she felt that what she had with him was something pure. Like she felt actually that he was her twin flame and that they were always meant to be together and that like the love that they had could embody like deep emotional connection, physical connection, all of this. So she cheated on me emotionally and then physically with him. Um, and I cheated on her too, you know? Because that's just I mean, again, we were replaying out these patterns of lying, keeping secrets, feeling insecure and unable to communicate. Um,
Have
and
you broken this pattern?
yeah, Yeah, I really think that I have. Um, my partner that I'm with now, who I've been with now since 2019, we have a I- we live together, we have a child together. You know, he's today's actually his first birthday. We have the most,
Wow.
yeah,
Congratulations, man.
thank you. We have the most communicative, supportive, vulnerability embracing space that I could ever imagine. And I'm infinitely, infinitely grateful for this person. I have been able to share with her, I'd say pretty much everything I feel shame about in my life. Um, we've been able to heal together. Um, and like I said, I'm really grateful. Like I don't know that the people that in my from my past have been able to have the same healing experiences that I've had because of things that they've said to me, just, you know, whenever it is they reach out, and I never reach back. You know, that's something that, you know, I'll say for even the audience is like, sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is never speak to them ever again. Just never, ever, ever, ever speak to them ever again, because nothing you're going to do or say is going to make them feel any better. And it's just going to reopen that door, and that door should stay closed.
It's so hard for so many people to set that kind of boundary. And then of course, if you have a kid together, then you
Oh, yeah.
can't
You
set
can't.
that boundary.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, so what shifted for you? Did something shift before you got together with your current partner,
So,
or did you heal in your relationship with her, or is a combination?
when my last relationship started to fall apart, when I basically caught my ex cheating on me because I accidentally, but not so accidentally, stumbled across her text messages. You know, we were like literally listening to music on a speaker, and I went to like go like swipe the phone so I could like press next or whatever, and it just opened up to a bunch of text messages, and I'm just like, well, fuck, look at that. That was hard. I realized going through literally that moment, and also reflecting on some of like the lies I'd been telling her and other things I'd done, that like this was bad. Like I've been doing the same thing over and over and over again. The common denominator in all of these situations that I'm in is me, and that I need to do something to change what's going on inside of me. Like and that's when I really got tapped into like the concept of shadow work. You know, I met with a couple astrologers. I started, you know, I think through the grace of God, like naturally found my way to like, you know, some to the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. That's when I started going back to therapy. Um, and I did all of it, you know, and that's when I started working with psychedelics. Honestly, also, in psychedelic work has been a major, major, major component of my ability to see things and see myself from a different perspective, and to be able to let things go, you know, like therapy is great, but it's like you can have a breakthrough in an hour, in a, you know, responsibly facilitated, held, you know, psychedelic experience, that no amount of hashing out words is ever going to give you, because as soon as you start to feel differently about things, you can start making different choices. But if you just try to think differently about things, you're going to be in a battle with yourself all, you know, not that you can't win that battle or harmonize that battle, but you know, being able to feel something you haven't felt before, being able to see things from a vantage point you haven't been able to felt like to see before, it allowed me to open up a whole world of forgiveness, for my ex for doing the things that she did to me, for myself for doing the things that I did to her and myself. Um, and so, you know, it was, and you know, basically early 2019 is when that relationship like really fell apart. Um, through like the fall of 2019, I was already like developing a relationship with with who is my partner now, with my new partner. um she told me about ayahuasca. I'd never really knew about it, but she told me about it because she was going through a divorce, and she had gone on an ayahuasca retreat, and that really did something for her. And I was like, well, that's curious. It's like, okay, you know, keep that on the back burner. And then as that word entered my head, maybe the iPhones were listening and picked something up, but I started to get, you know, podcasts recommended to me about, and maybe it's also like, because I'm looking at shadow work stuff and these different things, so I started to get these
The
different
universe
podcasts.
was telling you
Yeah.
something.
I
Yeah.
started to get all this information about plant medicine. And so I went on a personal journey, of doing a lot of solo work, not heavy doses necessarily, but like light to moderate doses of mushrooms, so that I could practice journaling in those states of consciousness. So I could practice having, allowing thoughts and feelings to surface and then using my tools to be able to face them and work through them as they came up. And these are, I believe, are not things that I could have done in like an ordinary state of consciousness. And that was really groundbreaking for me, and that really shifted a major trajectory in my life. I mean, since then, you know, I have facilitated at this point, I would say either facilitated or co-facilitated uh, a couple hundred, I would call them ceremonies for people of various different natures. Some using entheogens, some not. Sometimes all you need is a drum and a little bit of music to get someone to let go. But for my 36th birthday in 2019, I took myself to Peru for 3 weeks and I drank ayahuasca and had I drank several times and I had really groundbreaking experiences that helped me relate to myself and my whole relationship to existence in a totally different way. And, when I came back, you know, it's probably a story for a different time, but, my partner and I really went on a wonderful journey of discovering ourselves, of helping each other heal. Um, through like a deep sensual connection to life and to one another. And I say sensual, not sexual. Like, there's obviously sex is wonderful, beautiful, powerful sex, but like a deeply sensual connection. Um, that I just wish everyone could go through that. You know, it's like really
How do
the
you
most
so
beautiful.
how do you practice that on a daily basis? What does that look like?
On a daily basis, within my own self, it means staying committed and true to my physical practices because embodiment practices help me stay connected to my senses, to being in my body, feeling my body, trusting my body, listening to my body, honoring my body, as opposed to just being up here, analyzing, trying to problem solve. I do as little analysis and problem solving as possible. Like, I hate doing administrative work. It is not what I like to do. I have to do it, but it's like, it's all up here, like I try to operate from down here. I try to operate from down in my belly. Like the home is the heart, this is the office. I try to do most of my work from home, even when I'm in the office.
I love that. Yeah.
So it's and I'm I believe in some form of destiny or some form of plan because my partner is a deeply sensual person. She's a Taurus, she's
I'm astrologically kind of ignorant, so you'll have to explain what that means. And
well, every every sign has it's like the archetypes. They are archetypes. Every sign has its characters and attributes. And then when you combine the more subtle aspects of that, you kind of really start to see how a person operates and sort of even like what their life journey is. If you look at my chart from a deeper perspective, I was always meant to work in the healing arts with hands, not just with mind. And if you look at my chart, you will see that I was meant to go through a lot of relationship issues that would really help me discover how to help other people and how to heal myself and how to heal my family. If it wasn't for this healing journey that I've gone on, that a lot of my family does not understand, my son would have never been born. That's what I believe. Like this, my parents' grandson would have never been born. All of this healing journey got me to a place where I was finally able to photocopy myself. Put another, you know, I say like when my son was born, I went from being a leaf and I turned into a branch. You know, None of that would have happened. And I look at a lot of my family tree, and a lot of my family tree is dying because the healing hasn't taken place, you know? Um, so there's a lot to astrology. I mean, I think I think for everyone, even if you don't believe in it, you don't have to believe in it. The stars are moving, planets are spinning, we're spiraling through space. It's incomprehensible, right? It's just a model of observation, but it's a valuable model that people have used for millennia. So it's worth exploring, even if it's for just from a very beginner level.
Well, I want to wrap us up, even though I know I could talk to you for hours.
Let's do another one.
We could do another one. Yeah, there's other questions I would love to get to. Uh, but I like that we were able to give people watching snapshots of your journey and your relational journey over time. And, you know, for people who feel caught in one story, you know, because they're just getting out of a marriage and going through a divorce, you know, to hear from someone, you know, who has taken things from each relationship and looks at their life as a journey, um, and who's continually looking for growth and healing. I think it's so helpful. I mean, not to mention it's your own unique take on things. Um, so
You
where can
know,
people? Oh,
no, so I want to say
go
one
ahead.
thing. Pardon me. Honesty. Honesty is so, so, so important. It is so hard to be honest about the things we are ashamed about. And that shadow gets so heavy, it gets so deep. And, you asked if I'd let go of my patterns earlier. The biggest pattern that I've let go of is lying. I'm trying my absolute best all the time to just be honest. And sometimes that's really hard if you have to say things that you know will be hurtful. And then you get better at not doing things that you think you have to lie about in the first place. You start to have like a different moral compass, a different guidance system inside of you, and then you no longer put yourself in a life where you feel like you have to create these compartmentalizations. That's my biggest gratitude for the relationship I'm in, is that I don't feel like I ever have to lie. And if I ever feel like I have to, then there's probably something going on inside of me that I really need to look at, because that's the thing. Like, lying is that's what we have to work on in so many ways, you know. And
Yeah, that's a
when
really
when
great barometer for people entering a new relationship. Is
Mhm.
how honest can you be with this person? How authentic can you be?
It's you know so many of the things we carry from our childhood make us exquisite liars, and we don't even necessarily know that we're doing it or that we're acting that way, because it's so easy to tell a little lie that just kind of takes off in different directions. So honesty is key.
Awesome. Where can people find you? I know you've got a Substack.
Sure.
Um,
So my Substack is called Healthy, Happy, and Free with Dr. Christian V. I'm sure you can put up a link for that. My website right now for my clinical practice is buddhahandwellness.com. That'll be changing in a little while, but there will be forwarding links and all that. So I'll make sure that you have all that so you can share.
awesome. Okay. All right. And if you like this episode, if you like this channel, definitely like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.